Had a conversation with my 8-year-old son, Amos, the other week. He's been doing basketball at school in PE. And I said to him that Michael Jordan is the Lion King of basketball. Today, in our All Creatures Great and Small theme, we are thinking about the Lion King, the resurrected Jesus. And I said to Amos, Michael Jordan, no one compares to him. He went, really? I will decide that. So Amos, watch this clip now and see if Michael Jordan is the Lion King of the basketball court. The king returns. His father died. He went out of basketball, played baseball for a season and a bit, and then he came back to basketball. The Chicago Bulls were nothing without him. If you've not watched The Last Dance documentary on Netflix, and you have Netflix, I encourage you. I'm not a basketball fan, and I found it absolutely captivating about humanity. And when he came back to the Chicago Bulls, there was a belief again in that city that we can be the best. And they said, well, what's the press release we're going to do so that we can announce the return of the king, the Lion King of the basketball court? And Michael Jordan said just 2 words: I'm back. I'm back. If you compare the return of Michael Jordan to the resurrection of Jesus, the return of Michael Jordan is far more triumphant than the gospel readings of the resurrection of Jesus, especially as we read it in Mark's gospel. It's only later, I would argue, in the book of Acts and in the writings of Paul and Peter and John that they unveil the glory and the power of the resurrected Jesus. The return in the Gospels is far more subtle, especially Mark 16, verses 1 to 8. Let's watch that reading from Scripture together.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
There's our reading, and if Jesus had just died, then his death would have been noble, possibly brave, but that's it. I love my friend Ed Gamwells, but I disagree with him about Easter and Christmas. Easter is the important part for us because it's the fulfillment of the story that begins at Christmas, a story of mystery. Eugene Peterson, the writer of the Message version of the Bible, an American pastor, said, we inhabit a mystery. We must not pretend to know too much. We know that Jesus is risen from the dead, but we don't know exactly how it happened. We don't have the biological arguments for it. We just know that the power of God surged into Jesus' dead body in that tomb, and the stone was rolled away, and Jesus was and is to come alive again with us. Mark's Gospel goes on to chapter 16, verse 20, but most scholars and experts believe it finishes at verse 8 and that verses 9 to 20 were added on many years later to kind of round it off and give it a more triumphant, I'm back kind of feel. I believe it finishes at verse 8. It's an abrupt ending. The women's reaction here reminds us that there are no heroes in those who follow Jesus. Although, interestingly, if you read the Gospels, women never speak back against Jesus. They question, they ask, but they're not as belligerent as men probably are. We all limp on behind Jesus, and he leads the way, and sometimes he carries us. The Greek finishes with, they were scared, you see, for. That's how it ends. Barbara Brown Taylor, an American writer and priest, says, in Mark's struggling Greek, the ending is even more abrupt. And no one anything they told, it reads. And the final words are, they were scared, you see, for. It's awkward, isn't it? But it doesn't finish on a, I'm back. It finishes in a, something's happened, but we're not quite sure. They were scared, you see, for. They were scared, you see, for. Why? Maybe because they knew how to deal with death, but not the undoing of death. We know how to deal with death. We've been to many funerals. But this whole resurrection thing throws in a mystery that we can't quite compartmentalise and handle. They were scared, you see, for maybe because they'd followed Jesus, but when he died, they realised how many things they didn't have to believe in anymore, how many things they didn't have to hope for, how many things they didn't have to continue doing. They weren't sure that they wanted to go back to moving mountains. And maybe you and I have got used to bland religion. Maybe the supernatural has just become natural. Natural's great, but we need the power of God in our lives, don't we? And maybe those women were scared, thinking, we thought we'd put all that to one side. We thought we'd got back to just life as normal. We can't go back to following this Jesus who does amazing things. They were scared, you see, for, well, if Jesus had risen, death had lost its grip on them. Nothing could hold them back. There was no excuse for not putting both feet in with Jesus and following him. Sometimes we can get used to normal, safe, humdrum life, can't we? And to actually be met by the risen Jesus who wants to turn our life upside down so that we follow him in some ways that are normal and everyday and some ways that are challenging. Well, that can be a bit uncomfortable, can't it? Faith can make us really uncomfortable, and we can be really comfortable with just the facts. When they're mixed together, well, who knows what will happen? It can be scary. People on the basketball court were scared of Michael Jordan. He was the Lion King. Have you ever seen a lion up close? Are you scared of them? Here's a chap in our clip that wasn't scared of lions at all.
This is not a circus act. Unlike the vast majority of people who work with captive lions, Kevin Richardson doesn't carry a stick or a stun gun, and he doesn't control his animals through fear. In this relationship, the lions are his equals, and they rarely take orders.
You're naughty. You know you're a naughty lion. You're a naughty cat. You're a naughty cat.
That means he can break every one of the established rules for interacting with these big cats. He looks them in the eye, gets down to their level, lies down on the ground with them. And people who know lions say you should never ever turn your back on one.
Okay, come on. Whoa! We got that. Yes, like.
But seen from the drone, that same incident reveals Kevin's secret. The lioness goes on to do exactly the same thing to the male lion. Richardson is just one of the pride.
They do seem to be attached in a way, because when you go away, they do miss you and they do lovingly greet you when you come back. They're the only social cat, as we know, a truly social cat. So that's quite important to lions.
What do you think the biggest misconception about lions is?
Biggest misconception is mindless, man-eating killer. In fact, they are really just big, scared animals that are designed to kill, because that's how they've evolved. But the truth be known, they'd rather run away than confront.
What's the biggest misconception about lions? What's the biggest misconception about Jesus? I would say it's that he rose from the dead. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? They were scared, you see, for. People get the birth of Jesus, that he was born. People like the teachings of Jesus. Billy Connolly, the comedian, says he was a brilliant communicator and teacher of things that we should listen to. People like the way he looked out for those on the margins of society. We can get round Jesus, the social worker. But Jesus, the resurrected King, raises questions that many folks struggle to cope with. Why don't the Gospels make it clearer? Why weren't the experiences of the first followers of Jesus more emphatic? Because if we're going to respond in faith rather than, oh, it's fact, that's a free will decision. And our faith leads us to a point where we realise that it is fact. God in his grace and love gives us the option to reject him and to say we don't believe. The option to say, I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Without that, God is just an almighty dictator and we have to follow God. But God says, no, I want you to respond in love and faith, even if that is fearful, like the women running from the tomb, even if it is like the male disciples hiding in the upper room, fearing for their lives. Because when they do respond in faith and that gospel story rolls out, we see women and men who give their life to follow Jesus, who do amazing and brilliant and brave things. Sure, sometimes they still stuff it up, but they do change. And that is one of the evidences for me that Jesus rose. Why would these fearful bunch of people turn into people who all but one of them, the 12 disciples, were killed for following Jesus? Hung upside down on a cross, sawn in half, executed in other ways. If it wasn't true, if it was all a load of baloney and made up, surely one of them would have said at one point, hang on a minute, don't put me on that cross, we've made all this up, it's just our way of earning more money. No, they met the resurrected Jesus and they heard the I'm back when they responded to the I'm back. And it's always that way, isn't it, with us? However powerful our original spiritual experience is with God, it always leads to a deeper one when we take that first step with him and say, yep, I'm with you. Jesus is the Lion King. Lions in the Bible were there as a symbol of bravery and victory. And Jesus shows that in the Bible. But you know, raising Jesus from the dead wasn't just a magic, a spiritual trick by God so that Jesus could achieve immortality. It was far more than that. It was about social justice. Barbara Brown-Taylor says, when God brought a dead person back to life, it meant that God's reign was very near. For anyone who could read the signs, an empty tomb was the signal that God's justice was on the move. Not later on in heaven, but right then on earth. When Jesus rose from the dead, he was saying, I am bigger than Caesar. I am bigger than the Roman authorities. I am greater and more sturdy and solid than the temple in Jerusalem. I am the Lion King. And I have come so that all of humanity may know the love and grace and mercy of God. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that Christian who died in the Nazi war camp, said, to live in the light of the resurrection, that is what Easter means. This day is the day when we say Jesus is alive. And that changes my life. That changes my life right now as a living, breathing human being for us. But it also is a reality for those that we have lost, those that have died since we've been in this pandemic who know Jesus. Jesus' resurrection is a reality for Alec Green and for Ruth Smith and for Beryl Waggett and for Kaz and for David Metcalf and for Olive Butcher and Diane Hardy and Marion Sales and Graham Bentham and Tony Bridger and Hugh Bingham and Alan Clements and Graham Connell and Tim Lucas and David Hisley and Derek Hills and Mary Farmer and Roger Beck and Pat Burgess, and on Thursday, Ian Kirby. That resurrection is a reality for them. When they breathed their last in this God-forsaken pandemic, they breathed their first in eternity with Jesus, because the Lion King greeted them. And whilst here in Mark 16 it might be, I'm back, in eternity I am sure it will be, I'm back, and you're back with me, and you can spend eternity with me now. This passage is so precious to me because it's the one I read to my dad with my mum on Easter Sunday 2 years ago when he was dying, and they removed the cables and the tubes from his body in that hospital in London, and they left us with him as the adrenaline flowed out of his body and he breathed his last. It felt so appropriate because it was an I'm back, but it was also for my dad an I'm back. And he's up there with all those people I've mentioned and all the loved lost ones who've said yes to Jesus, whether faithfully or fearfully or feebly. And they are with their Lion King. These are my Birkenstocks. These are the ones that I've had for about 8 years. They're battered. The soles have come off. They've got chicken muck on them. And these remind me of Jesus on the cross, broken, battered and bruised and ruined for us. And these are the ones that my Joe got me for my birthday just a few weeks ago. New Birkenstocks, fresh, clean. They've got the odd mark on them, the odd scar on the hand and spear mark in the side. But they're so vastly different. I'd got used to living in these, where one of them actually flips inside out and I almost trip over, when actually I was always intended to live in these. Jesus the Lion King didn't die and rise again so that I would just live out his death. He died and rose again so that in the power of his life, we would live lives where people say, wow, maybe there is something about this Jesus. I'm back. Friends, are you walking out your life in these, filled with dirt, guilt, not getting on with life but living with past failures? Or are you, am I, living in the hope and the resurrection of Jesus? Yet they're still there, but they are triumphed by the one who rose again. Friends, let's walk in the power of the Lion King Jesus, who died for us and rose again for us as we celebrate today.